Sous-titres disponibles en français.
Untertitel in Deutsch verfügbar.
Subtítulos disponibles en español.
What if the roads you drive on today were hiding secrets from 2,000 years ago? We're diving into the fascinating world of ancient Roman engineering to pinpoint the lost roads of Charente, built 2 millennia ago. Let's discover how these routes continue to influence the region's geography and even its culture, offering a fascinating new perspective on history. For today's trivia question, in what century did the Roman Empire reach its height? And if you know that answer, how many continents did it span? If you pay attention throughout the episode, you'll find the detailed answer to these questions. In Roman times, modern France was known as Gaul. Under the reign of the first emperor Augustus, and in the decades before the birth of Christ, the Romans built approximately 13,000 miles of roads in Gaul. This network originated in modern-day Lyon, known then as Lugdunum. One important section covered the east to west route to Mediolanum Santonum, a distance of more than 300 miles. It was built under the direction of Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, who lived in the 1st century BC, for which it gets its name, along with via, Latin for road or way.
The Via Agrippa started here, in the modern French city of Saintes, which got its name from the Latin city Mediolanum Santonum, located here along the Charente River.
On the western end of the road, a number of Roman archaeological sites are still visible today. Portions of the road have become modern routes used by vehicles, while other sections have remained simple footpaths through the fields of Charente, pretty much unchanged over 2,000 years of history. The Roman amphitheater of Saintes, on the left bank of the Charente River, has become a local point of interest. Preserved and restored only recently, it managed to survive the nearly 2,000 years of neglect, pillage, and environmental changes. Prone to flooding during times of heavy rain, it is speculated that this was intentionally engineered during its construction to allow for simulated naval combat in the arena. Gladiators also fought here, and the impressive columns and passageways that remain today allow the imagination to run wild, thinking what could have taken place here so many centuries ago.
Saintes is a sub-prefecture in the Charente-Maritime department, and it's known for its Roman Colosseum, which you can still visit today.
The surrounding modern city of Saintes remains an important one, just as it was during Roman times. Nestled in the valley on both banks of the Charente River, it features the Basilica of Saint-Eutrope, with a dark and spooky crypt, also of Roman origin. Nearby, strolling along the narrow streets lined with shops and homes, the skyline is dominated by St. Peter's Cathedral. To start our journey east along the Via Agrippa, we cross the Charente River and discover the Roman Arch of Germanicus. This is the official starting point of the road, built by a rich citizen in the year 19 AD and dedicated to the Emperor Tiberius and his son Germanicus. Moving inland from Saintes, about 30 miles to the east, we come across the Gallo-Roman amphitheater of Les Bouchauds. It's one of the largest archaeological sites in France. Its modern-day history is nearly as interesting as its original one. Back in the time of the Romans, amphitheaters, such as this one, were the primary means of extending the influence of the empire. Using Latin as a unifying language, these venues provided entertainment, but more importantly, they were part of a larger spiritual and cultural movement. Digging on site here has revealed large buildings on the hilltop that were dedicated to Roman gods, primarily Mercury. Travelers along the Via Agrippa would likely make this an important stop on their journey. Both locals and those traveling could stay current on news and attitudes coming from the capital in Rome, at meeting points such as this one. Covering parts of Africa, Asia, and Europe, the Roman Empire eventually divided and disappeared, starting in the 3rd century AD. The amphitheater here slowly reverted back to nature. During the Dark Ages, Middle Ages, and Renaissance, it was forgotten about and covered with vegetation for many centuries. It wasn't until the Industrial Revolution when Jean Gontier, a local landowner, became intrigued by the one remaining structure still protruding above the ground. One of the lower columns at the bottom of the hill could still be seen, and the locals had stories and rumors about the enchanted castle, le Château des Fades, hidden in the trees. Children used to play there, and rumors had abounded for as long as anyone could remember. He began to wonder, why would a castle be built at the bottom of a hill? He eventually acquired the property, and then, in 1864, he began digging. It quickly consumed him, his time, and his fortunes. He spent years beginning an archaeological dig of the site, unearthing the first vestiges of what used to be an impressive Gallo-Roman structure. But nobody believed his theory. He was thought to be crazy. By 1884, running out of money, convinced by the importance of his discovery, he begged the local and national governments to acquire the site. But they took no interest in his claims. In 1894, desperate and broke, he committed suicide. With respect to his life's work, he's buried on the site, with his gravestone at the top of the hill maintained today by his descendants. It took until the 1970s before any serious archaeological work began here, done by professionals and with the help of the French Cultural Ministry. This was primarily thanks to a local historian and archaeologist, Gustave Raby, who admired Gontier's work and founded an association to protect and promote the site. In 2016, work began on further digs with an effort to understand how the theater and the much larger sanctuary to the Roman gods at the top of the hill were connected. Detailed study of the site has allowed a much greater understanding of how this Roman community functioned, with many surrounding buildings and structures being identified under the nearby fields and woods. Today, the location is open to the public, a sprawling complex of restored Roman ruins, archaeological digs, and many activities during the warmer months. It's a major educational site for local schools and teachers as well. A free summer event called Les Nuits Archéo takes place here every July, with different groups providing entertainment, similarly to how it was done nearly 2,000 years ago. The journey east will take us to another fascinating site, again lost to time and revived by the hard work of historians and archaeologists. We first crossed the river in current-day Montignac-Charente using a bridge that has been in the same place for at least the last 2 millennia.
The medieval guard tower and dungeons still remain here, and it's easy to see why this became an important strategic crossing point along the Via Agrippa.
A stage for many scenes of battles and conflicts over the centuries that followed, the Via Agrippa provided a transportation route well into the Middle Ages.
You can still follow the Via Agrippa out into the fields of Charente here, interrupted only by the construction of the railroad in the 19th century.
With the rise of the powerful Benedictine Abbey in Saint-Amand-de-Boix, just a few hundred yards away, a fortress was built here in the early Middle Ages, the Castrum d'Andone, from the Latin word castrum, where we derive the word castle. Like the other sites along the Via Agrippa, it wasn't until the late 20th century when archaeological work was done here to learn more about its past. Undertaken by André de Boer in the 1970s, it lasted a quarter century and became his life's work. His unexpected death in 1996 delayed the publication of these studies. Over 400,000 artifacts were recovered here. It was learned that this was a refuge primarily for medieval knights and horsemen, used for only a few generations before newer defensive structures replaced it. Today, almost nothing remains of this fortress, and it has quickly become overgrown once more, despite being placed on the list of historic monuments in France. "30 miles to the east, the first-century bathhouses of Cassinomagus lay hidden in plain sight for many centuries. A visit to the site today gives us a glimpse of the luxurious conditions offered to the travelers along the Via Agrippa. The arrival of the Roman Empire and colonization of Gaul brought about the construction of the bathhouses between the years 80 and 180 AD. The large thermal bathhouses here were heated. Located at an important crossroads, the town and structures that existed here weren't quite as large as a Roman city, such as Mediolanum Santonum to the west or Lugdunum to the east. Nonetheless, the imposing buildings here and archaeological discoveries all around them denote a very important commercial site along the Via Agrippa.
Hi, my name's Gabriella. I'm what they call in French here a médiatrice culturelle. So I'm sort of a tour guide, but I don't do only that. I do workshops with children. I do lots of work with schools also. And I've been working here since 2018 now. So we're standing in front of what we call vaulted rooms. And this is usually part of the visit that is only accessible to people who do guided tours here. When they come around to visit and only have the audio guide, this part is usually sealed off just because it's not very secure, and we like to keep them as preserved as possible because they're quite fragile. When you look at these just like this, you think this is an entrance, but it isn't actually. When these vaulted rooms were built, they were used as foundations for the bathers level, which is right above us. But once they were built, they were completely sealed off. So this entrance here doesn't date back to Roman times. It dates back to when the site was discovered in 1958, because parts of the wall had collapsed, which made them accessible. So the entrance that you have here that's very pretty was actually completely remodeled when the site was discovered in the 1950s. So the first thing to know about these vaulted rooms is they're usually built by groups of 3 or 4 rooms at the same time. So at the moment we're standing in a group of 3 rooms. That's why we have little passageways on each side which allow the workers to access the other rooms when they're building them. And to build these rooms, the process is actually quite simple to understand. As I was saying outside, they usually build the outside walls first, and then they're going to come and mould these vaulted rooms inside. First of all, they're going to build a tiny little wall, just like here, on each side, and then they're going to use a shuttering plank system to obtain this sort of vault here. So this shuttering plank system is made out of planks of wood, quite simply, and on top of these planks of wood, they're going to lay down their mortar. Their mortar is very simple. It's very similar to what we use today. It's a mixture of limestone, obviously, water and sand. But they're also going to add lots of stone to it. It's stone that they don't want to use anywhere else, rocks that aren't very pretty, and they're going to use them to bring more weight to the vault here. And you can actually see it very well on top of this one. You have rocks, you have bricks, etc. And once that mortar's dried up, they're going to get rid of the shuttering planks and the vault appears. And what's amazing here is when you look right above us, you can actually still see the marks left behind by the planks of wood when the mortar dried on top of them. What's very interesting also, you're going to find other types of little symbols, we'll say. The one here, you can see quite clearly. It sort of looks like an inverted N, and it's sort of like a signature as such, which would have been left behind by the person who made the shuttering planks. It was a way for him, obviously, to sign off on his work, but it also allowed him to get paid afterwards, because the idea was to count the number of symbols that you could see on the vault to know exactly how many planks of wood would have been used to build the vault.
And so that's an original, first century AD?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So we're in the same type of room as the first one. The building process is exactly the same. However, what's going to be different in here is the height of the room, which is more important than the first one. Why is that? That's because the baths, when they were originally built, were actually built on sloping ground. They chose to build on this sloping ground simply to make it easier for them to bring water to the baths, but also for the water evacuation system, made it much easier, obviously, to evacuate all the wastewater from the pools, from the latrines, etc. But obviously, if you're building on a sloping ground, you need to compensate that sloping ground. So they're actually going to use these vaulted rooms to do that also. So as you go up the hill, the vaulted rooms are going to get smaller and smaller, and as you go down the hill, so towards our left, the vaulted rooms are going to get bigger and bigger, and that's the case for this one. It's not very important difference in terms of height, but this one is already about 2 meters 30 high, and the tallest one we're going to have, the highest one, is going to be about 5 meters 30 high, so it's quite impressive. And the last thing that's interesting to see in here is right at the back over there. As I told you outside, the access we use to visit these rooms today is completely made up. It was made in the 1950s, meaning that obviously the workers, when they used to work here, needed another exit system. And that's what you can see right at the back over there. You have a little opening in the ceiling here, which they would have used to get out of these vaulted rooms. So this is our third and final vaulted room. One difference, however, is the height of the room this time. Earlier on, we were in a room where the height was more important. This time, the height is less important because we're going up the hill this time. And the other thing that's quite interesting also is the hole that you can see right at the back of the vaulted room here. That hole doesn't date back to Roman times, and it doesn't date back either to the 1950s or 1960s when the site was rediscovered. It actually dates back to the 19th century, 1870 more or less. And at the time, some research is done on the temple, which is no longer visible, unfortunately, today.
Modern traces of the history here started primarily with the work of Abbé Michon, who in 1844 studied the Roman maps that indicated a number of roads crossing at the site. He relied on the highly detailed Puttinger tables dating from the 12th century. This historical document was one of the few reliable sources that retraced the geography of the Via Agrippa. Believed lost for many centuries, it was rediscovered in 1714 and given to the Habsburg monarchy in Vienna. It remains in the Austrian archives as of today. Preservation efforts have been undertaken to prevent further decomposition of the document.
A gentleman named Monsieur Michon, who was a local abbot, and he started researching the temple, and he starts exploring these vaulted rooms which we're standing in now. He doesn't know what lies above us. We know there's a building here, clearly, but at the time they suspect it might be a Roman palace, so no idea that it's baths at the time. And he comes here and thinks, oh, it would be quite interesting to see what's on the other side of this room, and decides to destroy part of the wall to access the other side. Which is quite funny when we read back on what he left us, because he tells us how hard it was for the workers at the time to actually manage to cross through the wall, because the walls here are very thick, very wide. They're about 1 meter 20, 2 meters wide. And obviously what happens is he lands on the other side, expecting to find treasure, clearly. However, he just finds another vaulted room and just stops his research here. So the other vaulted room that we can see on the other side would have been left accessible when the baths were operating, because the workers here used it to store something. They actually used it to store the ashes that came from the ovens that heated the building. And why did they keep these ashes? Well, first of all, it allowed them to not have to leave the building every time they needed to get rid of the ashes. And secondly, we believe they used these ashes to fertilize their soil in agriculture. And that's why we call them today ash storerooms. So this is one of the first oven courtyards of the building. In total, there are 3, and this is the one in the northern part of the building. It's actually the courtyard in which you find most of the ovens. There are 6 in total inside this courtyard. So there's 2 on the left-hand side, 1 straight ahead. 1 is hidden slightly by the pillar on the left here. Then there are 2 others on the right-hand side. 1 is straight ahead once again, and the other one is hidden by the pillar on the right. And the last 2 ovens are actually on this side, and you can see those quite clearly still today. There's 1 here and 1 here. These ovens obviously have 2 uses in total. The first use for them is obviously to produce all the heat needed inside the bather's level. The heating system inside the ovens I'll tell you more about afterwards, because I'll be able to show you exactly how it worked. And the second use for these ovens is obviously to bring hot water also to the bather's level. So on top of these ovens, you have to imagine that there would have been a boiler system. These boilers, unfortunately, we only found fragments of, but you have to imagine that they would have been standing on top of a platform, right on top of the oven, and all the heat produced by the oven is simply going to heat up the water. The water is then distributed towards the different pools using a system of pipelines either made out of lead or terracotta, it depends. So this is one of the most famous, I'll say probably, pieces of Roman architecture, because it's something you're going to find in every bath built in the Roman world. And what does it consist in? Well, basically, you're going to have these stacks of bricks lined up next to each other. And imagine that these stacks of bricks are going to cover the entirety of the room underground. And these stacks of bricks are made up of bricks at first that each have the same size. But as the pile gets bigger, the bricks are going to get wider and wider, meaning that at the top, they're actually going to touch and join up together, creating the first level of the flooring inside the room, which is made entirely of brick. Then on top of that brick level, they're going to lay down some mortar once again, and on top of that mortar, at least for our baths in here, they're going to lay down some limestone slabs, and that's the flooring on which the bathers would have walked. What makes this heating system very efficient is the fact that the oven is right next to these stacks of bricks. So the hot air produced by the oven is going to enter the room directly. Hot air is very light, so it's going to rise up, which is very handy. And these bricks are obviously going to allow the hot air to get in each corner of the room. And that makes it a very, very efficient system, and that's why they used it in every bath. And you even find it sometimes in houses or in pottery making shops, etc. So we're standing here inside what we would have called the hot swimming pools room. It's made up actually of two swimming pools, so one that we can see right now and one that's right behind me. First of all, this is one of the best preserved pools we have inside this building here. And everything that you can see here is original. Nothing was renovated. So we're incredibly lucky, obviously, to have swimming pools in this state. This pool is about 12 meters long and 7 meters wide. In terms of depth here, we think more or less about 1.45 meter, 1.50 meter, more or less, meaning that where we are right now, we would have been standing on the edges of the swimming pool, basically. In terms of heating, however, this pool is slightly different to the other rooms inside the baths that are heated thanks to the Hypocaust system. Here, the Hypocaust system doesn't work simply because the stacks of bricks aren't solid enough to support the weight of the pool and the water inside. So instead, they're going to use these channels that we can see today because part of the floor has collapsed. And these channels are in charge of bringing hot air throughout the room. And that hot air, obviously, is delivered by an oven, which we can actually still see today. Right underneath the pathway over there, we can actually see an archway made out of brick, and that's just the top of the oven. This room would have been heated at about 40 degrees, more or less, for the atmosphere, and the water would have been heated at about 30 degrees, more or less.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, no problem.
Another interesting detail about the baths at Cassinomagus: some of the stone blocks here used for its construction came from the Rochechouart impact structure. A meteor impact here over 200 million years ago fused together different types of rock, leaving its mark on the Earth. During the Roman Empire, nothing would have been known about this geological artifact. It wasn't until the 20th century that the scientists would unpack the secrets in these local rocks. A longer segment on the Rochechouart meteorite is available in another video on this channel. Prehistoric groups of humans inhabited this area, and traces of them can still be found. The answer to today's trivia question is the 2nd century AD, years 101 to 200 AD. As we gathered throughout the study of the Via Agrippa and its westernmost segments, this period of history was the apex of construction and expansion in Gaul, as well as the rest of the empire. During a period known as the Pax Romana, the empire spread out to its largest extent in the year 117, right at the time the Via Agrippa would have served a large number of travelers. It spanned parts of 3 continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa. After that, it was all downhill for Rome, as it was cut in 2, then subdivided into factions in the following centuries, bringing on the Dark Ages in Europe. If you learned something new in this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment or question down below, and help the YouTube algorithm promote history and language learning by giving a quick thumbs up. History comes alive only when we relive it. Upcoming videos will include more on Templar history in France, more about small towns, and other backroads locations. Until then, thanks for watching. Merci et au revoir.